application, some frequently asked questions, the resources that you can find on the MIT Physics website, which are quite extensive, and we will encourage you all to check those out. And then we'll talk about the mentorship program that is an additional resource provided by the group of us that can be helpful if you need more resources after this webinar. Then after that presentation, we will move on to the Q&A, which will be the bulk of this 2-hour webinar. So we have panelists for the 2 hours, and I will specifically call out, so Lisa and I are members of PhysGAAP, which is the Graduate Application Assistance Program for the MIT Physics Department. It's a group of grad students who work to provide resources for applicants. Daniel, who I'm not sure if he's on yet, but he will be here, is a student member of the admissions committee. So he will have lots of useful insight as well. And then we have a handful of other current graduate students in each half of the webinar that will be providing their personal experiences and input. And then we also have Sydney Miller. Thank you very much, Sydney, for joining us. She's the graduate programs administrator, and she knows all about everything admin and application related and things like that. So it's wonderful to have Sydney here to answer questions as well. So moving on to an overview of the application. It is due December 15th. That's very important. So there's a handful of things that you need to prepare. There's an online application, which just contains a bunch of biographical data. There is an application fee. At MIT, it's $75. At other schools, it is frequently in the $75 to $100 range. But do not be afraid to ask for a fee waiver. I think we'll talk about it more in a second, but we will talk about it more in a second, but there are more than one way that you can get a fee waiver. So do not be afraid to ask if the application fee is a barrier for you. You will need to submit transcripts. At the time of your application, unofficial transcripts are fine, and then you'll be asked to provide an official transcript if you're admitted. You need 3 letters of recommendation. This is kind of an important point that to highlight. You must submit 3 letters. You can submit more, but the committee will likely only read 3 of them, and you don't get a say over which 3 the committee reads. So the committee will only read the 4th if they think that there's not enough information and you happen to submit a 4th. So just something to keep in mind. There is a place to provide a list of research experience, honors, awards, things like that. There is the statement of objective and purpose. There is an optional personal statement, and then you can optionally provide physics GRE scores this year. Now, the fee waivers, like I said, so there are sort of blanket eligibility for fee waivers if you have participated in MSRP, Converge, or other MIT programs or official recruiting visits. There are, so that's may cover some of you, but for the bulk of applicants, other underrepresented or under-resourced applicants may request a fee waiver from the Office of Graduate Education at the link there. And so they have, they provide fee waivers at their discretion. If you reach out to them and they do not provide you a fee waiver, you can also still reach out to the physics department, and the physics department will provide a second review of the decision, and the physics department has additional funds to support fee waivers for applicants that do not get fee waivers from OGE. But if you need a fee waiver, please allow plenty of time for this to happen, because you must be approved for the fee waiver by December 15th or submit the application fee. Otherwise, your application will not be reviewed. All right, so the language exam, this is another sort of common set of questions that we get. a big one is there a cutoff score? There is not a hard cutoff score on any exam for admission into MIT physics. But we will say that students who are admitted typically score above a 7 on IELTS or 200 on the computer-based TOEFL. And then we also get a lot of questions about who should take these exams. It is required if you are from a country in which English is not the primary language, but there are exceptions if you have been in the US or in a country whose official language is English for 3 years or longer and will have received a degree from a college or university in a country where the language of education instruction is English. And there are more information about this on the FAQ section of the admissions website, which I will highlight a few more resources there in just a second. And then the last FAQ that we will be going over in this intro presentation is about faculty sponsors. We get this question a lot. Do you need to reach out to faculty members or have a faculty sponsor in order to apply? Is that a requirement to apply? And the answer is no, you do not need a faculty sponsor to apply. You can apply if you have never emailed or talked to a faculty member at MIT. That is totally fine. We encourage people after you are admitted to reach out to faculty to talk about research and various labs and things like that. But you do not need to do that in order to apply. All right, and then now what I want to do is highlight the resources on the graduate admissions webpage. There's a lot of great stuff here, and it will cover a lot of the questions that we will be getting during this webinar. So I encourage you all to check out all of this information that we've compiled. There's the link at the top of the page. You can also find it by going to just physics.mit.edu and navigating through the drop-down menu at the top. It has a lot of good stuff. It has a lot of information that I've already talked about, materials required, when and how to apply, more detailed FAQ, which I will very briefly run through in a second. Information about the application assistance, which includes things like this webinar and the mentorship program that I'll talk to you in a couple slides. Additional guidance with examples and a link to the graduate application. And then some more general information about the graduate program and research areas, as well as tons of other good stuff. All right, so the FAQ section on the website is great. There's tons of stuff there. And I will run through some of these things, but I encourage you to check it out in more detail. What is included in a strong graduate application for physics at MIT? We ran through the required materials, and you can read more about what we have to say here. But as far as things that have shorter answers that I can go through in the time of this presentation, there's all these things, and so I want to run through them. So first up, must you have a degree in physics in order to apply to this graduate program? No, you can apply if your undergrad degree is in something else. What are the requirements to complete a PhD? Information about that is on the website. Can I take courses at other schools nearby? Yes, it's really easy to take classes at Harvard. How many years does it take to complete the PhD requirements? It usually takes 5 to 7 years. How will I pay for my studies? Everyone is funded. You do not have to pay for your own, you do not have to pay tuition or anything like that. You will be funded on a TA, an RA, or a fellowship for the duration of your studies. One that we get a lot, how many applications are submitted each year and how many students are accepted? The number of applications we receive has gone up in recent year. In recent years, we've been getting about 1,600 applicants, and we accept on the order of 90 students. What are the minimum grades and exam scores for admitted applicants? There are no cutoffs. We'll highlight that again. When is the deadline to apply? It is December 15th. Question about COVID and taking exams in person. You can still apply. The regular GRE is not required or accepted for the physics department admissions. The physics GRE is optional. And that is truly optional. If you do not submit a physics GRE score, you will have full consideration of your application. Does the department provide waivers for the English language exams? In certain cases, I went over those a little bit already. Does the department provide application fee waivers? Yes, 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 but please reach out about those ahead of time. Can I arrange a visit to the physics department or certain specific research area? Not currently. Things may be evolving and may depend on research areas, but in general, I don't think there are any sorts of like organized visits before the open house for admitted students. Can I receive an update on the status of my application? Not after submission, so submit your application, and as long as everything's there, you will be considered and your application will be read, and then we will, the department will get back to you in the winter once decisions have been made, but you cannot receive updates in the meantime. You will be notified of your final decision before March 1st. And can admitted students start in a term other than the next fall semester? It happens occasionally, but very rarely. So don't necessarily count on it. Okay, that was a lot of information. I think that will likely have answered a lot of the questions that you all have. So we will not be sort of going back over questions like that unless they're sort of more detailed or nuanced versions of those questions. But if you want even more information and, this webinar doesn't answer your questions, another resource that you have is we did 2 webinars last year, and both of those, the recordings and the transcripts are available on the same physics department application website. You can scroll down to the webinars section and there's YouTube links to these 2 webinars that we did last year. So we encourage you to check those out as well. Lots of great questions answered there. And I think this is the last thing before we get to the Q&A is the mentorship program. So after this webinar, applications for the PhysGAAP mentorship program will open. The PhysGAAP mentorship program is a one-on-one mentorship program with current PhD students in the physics department at MIT. It is aimed at people who especially who have attended the webinar and you found that the webinar did not provide sufficiently detailed guidance and you think more guidance would be useful. It may be a good fit if you feel like you lack other resources to help you navigate the grad school application process, either from your home institution or what you're able to find through things like this webinar on our website. It may be a good fit for you. If you could benefit from this one-on-one application mentorship, like I said, and again, check out the other webinars. You also there's an email address, physicsgrad@mit.edu. There's more information about that at the website, but if you have more sort of one-off questions about like department culture or things like that, you can also email that email address. But if those things do not meet your needs and you think that more guidance would be helpful, you can apply for the mentorship program after the end of the webinar. And there's more information about it, again, on that same graduate admissions website. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I think I hit my 15-minute goal. So now we will be moving on to the Q&A, and our goal here is to answer questions that were not answered or not sufficiently deeply answered in the FAQ section that I just ran through. Again, we will be only answering questions on the Slido. So if you have a question, don't raise your hand or put it in the Q&A or anything like that. Put it in the Slido. The link for that is in the email and in the Zoom chat. And in a moment, when I put up the Slido, there will be I think a QR code as well. But submit questions there and upvote existing questions before asking your own. We will be answering them more or less in the order of most upvoted questions first. So go take a look at what questions are there and upvote if you see one that is the same as the question you have. If we don't address your questions during this webinar, you can email that email address, physicsgrad@mit.edu. Again, there's more information about that on the website, but feel free to do that if we don't get to you. And I believe most of the panelists have done this, but if you have not, please put your name and here. Yeah, looks like we're pretty good in our Zoom names. And so when someone's answering a question, this will help give you a little bit of information about their background. But we will go ahead and do introductions now before we start. And then we'll go for about 40 minutes. And then at the hour, we will take a brief pause. We'll swap out panelists and do more introductions of the new panelists, and then continue answering questions for the second hour. So, and thank you, panelists, for bearing with me through the presentation section. Appreciate you all being here. So let's do panelist introductions. I cannot easily see everyone, so I'll go ahead and then yeah, just kind of popcorn around the rest of us. So I'm Kyle. I'm a third-year PhD student in AMO. I work in Ike Schwang's group on experimental trapped ion quantum computing, and I actually do a lot of my research out at MIT Lincoln Lab, which is a federally funded research and development center run by the Department of Defense out in Lexington. So happy to answer questions about things like working at other places, labs, internships, things like that. And I am one of the co-chairs of the grads advising graduate admissions, and I help run PhysGAAP. Yeah. Anyone else can go?
Hi, I'm Lisa. I work with Professor Scott Hughes in the astrophysics division. And my research is primarily focused on theoretical gravitational wave studies. So I typically study extreme mass ratio inspirals, which are basically systems where you have a very small black hole and a very large black hole in a system together. And I'm an international student from Australia, so I'm happy to answer questions about coming from overseas. And I'm a fifth year. Okay, so maybe the next person we can have is Chris.
Yeah, sure thing. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris. I'm a first-year student also in the astrophysics division. I came from the University of Texas at Austin. I'm currently working with George Ricker on some optical instrumentation for space-based telescopes. My background in undergrad was actually in chemical engineering and physics, and my research now is quite far removed from what I did in undergrad. So if you have questions about maybe transitioning or even coming from something other than physics, I can hopefully answer things like that. And I guess I'll popcorn over to Daniel, or if he's not here.
Okay. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm a third year in quantum information. Yeah, I guess I've been helping out with grad admissions in various capacities, so happy to answer any questions.
And I'll just jump in and say that Daniel is the student member of the admissions committee that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So yeah, thanks for being here, Daniel.
I think Mason also was on the committee.
Yeah, I don't know how participatory Mason is. I think he's running the Slido in the background. So.
Oh, should I popcorn to Andre?
Hi, everyone. I'm Andre. I'm a second year student in condensed matter theory. Right now I work with Professor Martin Solicic. I'm interested in topological aspects of condensed matter physics and photonics. I also do a little bit of light matter interactions. And yeah, so Tommy, go ahead.
I'm Tommy, and I'm a first year CMX student. So CMX basically like short for condensed matter experiment. I'm working with Professor Nugetic. So we basically do ultra-fast optics and pulse spectroscopy to study like quantum materials, strongly correlated electrons. And, so I was previously from Singapore, but I did my undergrad in the University of Cambridge. So I think I'm happy to answer like questions from like UK universities. So I think like I think the US system may not be too familiar with how the UK system works. Yeah. Maybe I'll pass to Josh.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. My name is Josh. I'm a first year grad student in NUPAX, which is short for Nuclear and Particle Experiment. I work with Janet Conrad in experimental neutrino physics. A bit about my background. After graduating in 2021, I took a year away from physics and I worked in industry. So if you have questions about that transition, happy to take those. I'll popcorn over to Sydney.
Thank you, Josh. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate all the students and everything they're doing, stepping up to make themselves available to answer questions. They are truly your most valuable resource. But I am here if there are questions they can't answer having to do with the administrative process of the application process, or in some cases, the structure of the degree requirements, because I handle those as well. You may have seen my emails. I also monitor the physics-grad email address, so that comes to me. Hopefully I'm relatively responsive. If you have questions, I'll tell you the same thing I tell our current students. Follow up if you don't hear from me within a couple of days. And I'll also be forwarding questions to students if you have something about student culture or something specific about research. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sydney.
Is Dominica available? Because I can popcorn to her.
Yeah, I don't know if you're planning on answering questions, Dominica, if you're just
I think Mason and Dominica are managing the Slido in the background.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, all right. Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, so for the Q&A for the panelists, I think just go ahead and raise your hand if you want to answer a question, and I'll call on a couple of people, and then we may not get to everyone for each question to keep things moving. And we'll try to avoid doing too much repeating. So awesome. Let me now share the Slido. So here, okay. Is this working? Cool. And as a reminder, submit the questions in the Slido, not anywhere else. There's a QR code here. You can go to slido.com and plug in this hashtag as well. Yeah, this is what we're going to be. We'll be hanging out here for the next hour and a half. So move things around so I can see. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So the first question, for all admitted applicants, what's the portion of those having first authored journal or conference papers compared to those who don't, say, in the last cycle? So anyone wants to take a stab at the first question? And can I see whose hands are raised? Okay. Yeah, sure, Chris.
Sure. I don't really have an overarching statistic for you. I can just kind of give my experience with people I know in Astro. I think most of us, at least in my current cohort, had maybe one paper. I when I applied had a paper in review, but it wasn't accepted, so it's definitely not a requirement. And I think that's relatively common. You definitely don't need to have a first author paper to be a successful applicant.
Great. Andre, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say that it's sort of common lore that I heard when I was applying that, oh, you should have a paper, especially if you're in theory. I did not have a paper. I didn't have even a manuscript. I sort of wrote it in my application that I had a manuscript under preparation, which was true, but that ended up never coming out for a number of reasons. I never presented at any conferences. But I think, well, of course, your application is stronger if you have some kind of paper or some kind of manuscript. And I try to compensate in other aspects. So anyway, just an example that no, you do not have to have any sort of paper.
Great. And Sydney.
I just want to add that as a matter of process, because I don't think this is obvious necessarily to applicants. Oftentimes, at the time that people submit their application, they may have a paper that's been submitted that hasn't yet been decided about whether it's going to be published. And you do continue to have access to your application. You can log back in to update that information if your situation changes. That's also the mechanism for updating your transcript during the review process. So I just wanted to add that.
Great, thanks. Go ahead and move on to the next question. If you took less than 50 out of more than 1,700 applications last year, to expect more apps, or was last cycle different because of COVID? Are funding and opportunities in Astro back to normal? So I guess first of all, I want to say that the 50 is not correct. It's more like 100 accepted, and then of those 90 to 100 acceptances, about 50 people actually like decide to come here. So yeah, let's see, Sydney, is your hand still up? You want to? No, okay. Yes, so maybe someone in Astro, I'm not sure what they're talking about, funding and opportunities in Astro. Sure, Lisa.
I mean, I can't comment specifically, but I'll say that funding always varies from year to year. Like it's very dependent on individual research groups and individual professors as to whether they have funding for their research. And I think that applies not just to astrophysics, but to across all different areas of physics. So it will vary from year to year. That's just the nature of things. But RA funding from grants isn't the only way to be funded. You can also be funded through a TA, which is a teaching assistantship, and you can also be funded through fellowships. So sort of the funding directly through a professor's grant isn't the only way to receive funding. As for whether we expect more applications, I don't know, maybe Sydney can comment on this. I'm not 100% sure.
So I don't know about the... Oh, sorry. Can I go ahead and comment?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know about the differences in the number of applications, but I will say that there is variability also year to year about who's going to be on sabbatical the following year. And there are just a lot of unknown factors that relate to what will happen with the number of offers that are made in a specific area, things that we can't even know about at this stage. So I would just put forward your best application and trust to the process, and appreciate that there's unknowns behind the veil. And we apologize for that.
Yeah, maybe maybe we should take this time to talk a little bit about, I think we can talk a little bit more about how that works in the sort of the fellowships meeting or whatever they call it. So I'll give my my understanding of it, and if there's anything that anyone wants to add or correct, feel free to jump in after. So in the interest of transparency, how I understand the process to happen is there's, and actually maybe Daniel on AdCom should jump in here too. But actually, yeah, Daniel, do you want to do that to talk about like sort of the first round or 2 rounds of the application reading? Just a brief
Yeah,
overview.
sure. So there are multiple rounds of application review because we got like 16 or 1,700 applications. It's hard to read all of them. So the main purpose of the student admissions committee is to well, first of all, make sure everyone gets like multiple reads and get like you know, like we thoroughly read everyone's like letter of recommendations and personal statements and this kind of stuff. And after that, there is like some filtering involved, and then it goes to the like specific subdivision readers. And in the subdivisions, I think applications will typically be read at least 3 times by various faculty in your subdivision, and I think those who admitted will get read at least like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. And then sort of at the end, after it's been read by the divisions, each division kind of has some say over, or they, they have some amount of money that they have to support applicants. And so the main purpose of this is just to make sure that everyone's going to be funded. So the divisions will have some money for TAs, and then the different professors will have different amounts of grant money to support RAs, and then there's some number of fellowships. And at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to each division will take as many students as they're able to guarantee funding for. And so that works different in different divisions. Different divisions have different percentage of money coming from grants or TAs or RAs or fellowships. But yeah, that's sort of at the end of the day how the process works. Sydney, did you want to add anything?
So those are all awesome descriptions. The only thing I'll add, just to be super transparent about this, is that the faculty must have a plan for providing long-term funding for each person to whom they make an offer. So we don't really know, for instance, the fellowships that we might have available, the one-year fellowships that we have available for some incoming students come from our donors. Our donors are very generous, but we don't know how much money we'll receive from them until after the beginning of the year. And even if we have a one-year fellowship for a prospective incoming student, the area of their research must be able to vouch for having a long-term plan for their funding. There are some, even departments at MIT, but there are some other programs where people will apply and not really be guaranteed long-term funding. When we say that we have funding for everyone long-term, we truly do stand by that. So I did want to jump in with that, and I'm happy to take further questions on that topic by email if people want.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. And then, yeah, hopefully that provided a little bit of transparency and clarity to all of you watching. But if you have more questions, you want follow up on any of that, feel free to submit and upload questions in the Slido. Great, so we'll move on to the next statement, and anyone feel free to jump in on this one. What tips would you give for writing the research statement? Yeah, Tommy.
I think the large part of the research statement is to describe very clearly who do you want to work with, because after all, it's like faculty are also looking for students, so that should hold a very huge importance in your letter, in the research statement. And try to give like up to three faculty you're interested in, maybe do a bit of background reading, what he's working on, and what new perspectives you could bring. And I think it's very helpful for your entire statement to have a theme. So if you have a topic in mind that you want to focus on, you could always use the entire statement as a theme that revolves around this topic. You don't have to commit to the topic, and you definitely do not have to commit to the faculty members that you originally expressed interest, but it will be very helpful for someone who's reading the statement to have a better idea how you're like if you were to take you in, for example.
Great. Andre?
Yeah, I think one advice I would give is to try to toot your own horn as much as possible, but not within realistic standards, right? You're not going to lie or say, I'm going to solve all of physics in my 2 years of PhD. So if you had research, hopefully you did some research experience in undergrad, just try to emphasize what were your contributions to the projects. Maybe you weren't necessarily spearheading, but maybe emphasize that, and then say what were the consequences. Did it become a paper or a presentation or a poster, something like that? And hopefully that'll also be conveyed by your letters of recommendation. But I think that's pretty important. They're looking, in my opinion, I think they're looking for some moments of creativity, hard work, and don't feel shy to, I'm not as good as I think I am describing myself to be. That's okay. Is try to emphasize that and do not be shy.
Great, thanks. Lisa.
I'll just quickly reiterate what Andre said, particularly in the context of if you're an international student applying, certainly the American style of research statements and personal statements is to, as Andre said, toot your horn to some extent, and that can be a cultural difference depending on what country you're from. It's definitely important to highlight the positive aspects and all of the things that you've done, and put them in like as good of a light as possible. Of course, not exaggerating or not stating anything that's false, but this is not really the place for modesty. And yes, I think that was one of the things which I struggle with the most in writing my application. If you're someone who's international and you know someone who has some experience working in an American institution as a postdoc or a professor, it would be good to have them read the statement to see if that's the right style. And you can also apply to the PhysGAAP mentoring program and have grad students at MIT read your statement if you think that would be helpful.
Awesome. And Daniel?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Andre and Lisa said. So when I was applying to grad school, I workshopped it quite a lot and also had help from like the writing office in my university. And then now I'm on the other side where I'm reading applications. And I language, like using the words I, starting sentences with I did blah, blah, blah is good. Just to like draw my attention to like specific sentences that I want to read. Like I said, you should emphasize your own contribution. And also, I guess the whole point of this is that you want to show that you will succeed in grad school. And soft skills are almost more important than the hard knowledge, because more likely than not, you will have to like relearn all the hard knowledge once you start grad school and you work in a specific project. So like they were saying, things like perseverance and creativity, those kind of things are what we look out for. And secondly, as a practical note, I was kind of shocked when I heard this before I started reading applications, but like each whole package is read in maybe like 10 minutes max. And that's just the reality that like we have 1,700 applications and only so many people. And even then it's like almost a full-time job over winter break. Unfortunately, I can't like read it like a novel, like sentence by sentence, and I end up doing a lot of skimming. So the easier you make life for the people who read, like everyone wants to read your application as thoroughly as possible, but the easier you make it for them, the better chance you'll have to get your message across.
Yeah, awesome. And I will just jump in and reiterate, I don't know if it was Andre or someone else who mentioned something about sort of highlighting who you want to work with at the department, things like that. So something that I didn't hear until I came here from Matt Evans, the admissions chair, who I believe is the only person who reads all 1,700 of those applications every year. He likes to see like half a page or something like that on like what you want to do specifically at MIT and professors and things like that. So that was more weight than I gave that in my statement. So that's useful tidbit.
Yeah, if I can say something, they'll also try to like make sure those people who you listed will read your application. It's not guaranteed. But yeah.
Great. Okay, let's keep going. So how disadvantaged is an international application whose letters of rec are not from the US? Content matters, but the recognition of the writers brings some bias. How do you deal with that? Sure, Tommy?
I don't think there's any bias per se, because the application is looked at it holistically, like your transcript, your CV, your personal statement, and everything. But I guess it's maybe slightly less helpful if like maybe like the profs here do not really know your profs, that might be an issue, but it's not a major issue, because after all, what the community would want to look at is how you like as a person, how you have performed in your previous projects. So it will be helpful on your part to provide your referees like concrete content so that they can write on and fully expand it on. I mean, after all, everyone is quite busy, and you want to help your referees to help you get into your school. Yeah.
Yeah. And Sydney.
Just to add super quickly that it's always more important to get a letter from someone who truly knows you and can speak about you than it is for us to know who they are. It's about you. You are the person applying.
Thanks. And Daniel?
Okay, maybe I will say that there is a bias. It's just a fact of life. Especially like the division readers, they will know who well-known faculty are, and it does affect it. We are aware of it, and we're trying to, take that into account. But like what Sydney said, it's much better to have a letter writer be someone who knows you well instead of someone who's a well-known person in the field, because well-known people tend to have to write a lot of letters, and then you can easily tell what's a generic letter for them, especially because we can compare what other letters this person wrote before. And generic letters will just like, they won't go into any details, and it'll be very, letters almost never say anything negative, but it will also not really say anything positive. So it's much better to have a letter be from someone who knows you well. And like I think Tommy and Sydney said, it's good to like also email them and remind them of what your contributions were or what you voted with them on, so that they can make the letter as detailed as possible.
Yeah, great. And cool. So we'll move on to the next question. You may also be helpful here, Daniel. If I was rejected last year and want to apply again this year, would that put me at a disadvantage? And maybe I can ask you a more targeted question, which is like, do you even know when you're reading the applications if they had applied in a previous year, Daniel?
Yeah, we know. I mean, it's just on file, but in practice, at least the student readers, like there's so much other information to take into account that this is, it's a small epsilon, but it just like goes over my head really quickly.
Cool. Josh?
Yeah, I don't know if this addresses this question directly, but I think to speak more broadly, I applied to quite a few graduate schools the year before I applied to MIT and got rejected from many of them. And that was something that I made a point to highlight in my like research statements and statement of purpose of like what I was doing in the meantime that makes me a better applicant this go round than I was last year, which is especially important given that you've probably heard already how holistic the admissions process is. And so communicating that story, and maybe if you were rejected from MIT last year and you're applying again this year, my advice to you would be to highlight what you've done differently between then and now.
Great. And Sydney?
Just absolutely what Josh said. And I will tell you that there have absolutely been people admitted who had been rejected the prior year. So that's happened.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So the next question is, how important is a master's degree before applying to a PhD at MIT? And Sydney, I don't know if your hand is intentionally up. Okay. But
I can address this if you want. But I'd
you're
love to hear
welcome
from other, I'd love to hear
Okay.
from other people.
Sounds good. Lisa? You're muted.
I'm sorry. This is an interesting question because most people who start at MIT as a PhD student do not have a master's degree. So in the US, if this is a question asked by an international student, in the US, you have 4-year undergraduate degrees, and then typically you'll go straight into a PhD program after that. In countries outside the US, very often you have something more like a 3-year undergraduate degree, and then a 2-year master's program, and then a PhD. So I think a master's degree can help if you do a 3-year undergraduate degree and then do a master's, and then you might have something more like a 4-year pre-PhD higher education block. That might be helpful, but it's not necessary. So actually on the FAQ on the graduate admissions website, we emphasize that if you have a 3-year undergraduate degree, that's sufficient. It can help, but it really just depends on the person. It depends what you did in your master's. It's not necessary. I'll let Chris follow up.
Yeah, sure. I think that was probably what we'd all say, that quite a few people, most of the people here probably don't have a master's degree coming in. I just wanted to add, because I saw some other questions coming in, like, can we transfer coursework that we had in our master's degree, stuff like that? Like, how would it help? And it's like, I don't think you can directly transfer any coursework, but it can help with getting out of certain classes and perhaps advancing into research a little bit faster. And that might be another question coming up, but there's information on the webpage about those requirements as well.
Yeah, cool. And then Andre, briefly.
Yeah, so just to add to what Lisa mentioned, I did my undergrad partly in Brazil, where I'm from, and partly here in the US. I did not get a master's, but most of the people that I know that come from South America / Europe kind of got a master's, in at least in my field and adjacent fields. So I think it is not necessary, but oftentimes it does help, especially if you're an international student.
All right, great. Cool. So the next question is, what are the key indicators or qualities that MIT looks for in a candidate? I think we've talked about most of this already. If anyone has like anything else that you feel like has not been brought up, feel free to raise your hand. But otherwise, I think we can consider this one already addressed. Anything that hasn't been brought up yet? All right. So then the next question is, how technically worded should my statement of purpose be pertaining to the topics I have worked on previously and the ones I am interested in working on in the future? So I can maybe say a little bit about this. So as has been mentioned, if you name people in your application, the admissions committee will attempt to get your application read by them. It's not guaranteed, but it is likely. So if some of the application is kind of aimed at them, that's okay. But what you don't want is an application filled with jargon, because it will definitely be read by people who are very unlikely to be in your field. And so it should be readable by sort of, general physics audience, and then, maybe some of the parts would be more up the alley of the people that you say in it, but avoiding jargon in general is important. Yeah, Daniel?
Scientific communication is also a skill. It's essential for your success in grad school, and how readable your statement is reflects on how well you're able to scientifically communicate. I guess, like, generally when I read statements that are outside of my field, that's of course different for the division readers, but I look out for, like, why are you doing this? What did you do? And what were the outcomes? And if I broadly understand the big picture of those 3 questions, then I'm pretty happy with what I read.
Great. Okay, so moving on. How much weight is given to GPA over research experience and reference letters? So I think in general, graduate admissions tends to weight or research experience and reference letters most heavily. But I think maybe the important thing to say is that, again, we're looking for people who are going to succeed, and I think Matt Evans uses the word thrive in grad school. So that's what you want to highlight. And some of that is classes. There are required courses, but most of it is research. Cool. No one else wants to add to that? For those of you who did theoretical physics research, had you published any papers before getting admitted? Was Paul the theorists in here? I don't actually know exactly. Anyone who's a theorist, feel free to chime in. Lisa.
I mean, I do theoretical astrophysics. I don't know if that's quite what they're asking about. I did have a paper published. I think I'll just reiterate what was said earlier in the call. It really depends on your whole application. And it depends also on the professor and whether they feel confident that you can take on the research that you say you want to do. So if you can demonstrate that through other ways other than presenting a research paper, then that's totally fine. I think it does help to have a paper. Yeah, that's all I have to say, I guess.
Andre?
Yeah, very much related to what Lisa just said. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am in theory, I'm a condensed matter theorist, and I did not have any papers published, nor like a concrete manuscript for submission on the archive or anything like that. But your application is evaluated holistically. And I think I compensated in other aspects. I think I have the impression that my letters were very good. And again, as Lisa's mentioned, like doesn't have to be a paper, it could be conference, some kind of presentation. Make sure to emphasize that. I like to structure my research statement like, oh, I had this project, here are my contributions, and here was the upshot. So I gave some presentation, or my PI gave a presentation on the topics that we explored in some conference or something like that. So make sure to add that if you have something like that.
Yeah. Just very briefly, I think just to add, I did not realize when I was in undergrad that like conference presentations and things like that are weighed as heavily as they are in the graduate application process. So definitely highlight those if you have them. Cool. So next question is, did you continue in your undergraduate research subfield, or did you try something new in grad school? Do you have any advice in regard to this? Chris?
Sure. So what I'm doing now in my research, which is some optical instrumentation, is pretty far removed from what I did in undergrad, and it's even far removed from what I applied to do, basically. So my advice would be to kind of, even if you're not 100% sure what you want to do, if you have the correct background for something, just kind of still be clear in your research statement about your goals as a scientist and the things that interest you at the moment. And even if there's not an exact match for the thing you want to do, they might find something that's related. Like I said, oh, I want to do instrumentation for gravitational interferometers. And they found another person I could work with in something somewhat similar, but that I don't have experience in. So you can definitely apply without experience in a certain field, and they'll find someone who matches you, even if you're learning on the fly the first year or so.
Yeah, awesome. I can also chime in a little bit. I maybe would have technically said I did AMO in undergrad, but I never took an atomic physics course or really worked with much in the way of atoms. So it was also definitely a switch for me. And yeah, that's like, it's totally doable. Plenty of people do it. And it's definitely, yeah, a learning curve when you get here. But, you know, everyone has to learn lots of new things when they start in grad school. So that's really not unique to that. Cool. Let's see, it is the hour. Let's see. Let's wait to introduce new panelists a couple more minutes so we can get all of the second hour panelists here. If anyone needs to leave, feel free. You're also welcome to hang out like as long as you would like to during the second hour. You don't have to go if you want to continue answering questions, but anyone who needs to leave from the panelist side, feel free. And then, yeah, we'll do another question or two. Yeah, thanks everyone. And then introduce the new panelists. Cool. So let's see, next question is statement of purpose versus personal statement versus motivation letter. So let's see, maybe Sydney, could you just briefly remind us of exactly what the MIT physics application asks for?
I'm not familiar with a motivation letter, actually, but the statement of, sometimes people don't want to put personal matters in their statement of purpose. It's certainly up to the individual how they use their statement of purpose. The personal statement, the statement of purpose is, of course, required. The personal statement is purely optional. And that's been a recent addition to the application. In recent years, many people have used it to describe the impact of COVID on their studies, for example. That's not the only thing it can be used for. They might describe something that they feel relates to their background and that, maybe hasn't allowed them to thrive as much as we hope that they will thrive in grad school. I'll see if anybody else wants to weigh in on this.
Yeah, maybe I'll just chime in and say that, like, if your question is of the form of X unusual thing happened to me and it adversely impacted my undergraduate studies in some way, how will that affect my application? The optional personal statement is sort of where that's designed to go. You can of course put it in your statement of purpose, like Sydney said, but like that's what this is designed for. Yes, and then so just to be clear, statement of purpose required, personal statement optional, motivation letter is not asked for by the MIT physics admissions. Cool. Yeah, Sydney. Oh no, sorry, I just got a notification. All right. So then the next question, let's see. So, oh, Michelle's here. All right. Yeah, so let's do introductions for all of the panelists for the second hour. Yeah, if you are new, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, give your name, division, who you work with, and if there's any sort of particular genre of question that you are particularly well suited to answer. Maybe let's start with Hao Chen, and then yeah.
Yep. Hello, everyone. My name is Hao Chen. I'm currently a fourth-year graduate student in the astrophysics division, and I work with Professor Kiyoshi Masui on 21-centimeter cosmology. So this year, I'm also serving as the president of the Physics Graduate Student Council, and I'm also an active officer in one of our graduate student dorms, Ashdown House. So if you have particular questions about physics student life, like within the department, as well as like life in student dorms, or just anything general about the department, like feel free to ask me, and I will be happy to answer like any related question.
Great. Let's see, Xiaowei.
Okay. You hear me all right?
Yeah.
Double checking. Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm Xiaowei. I'm a third-year grad student in Astro. I work with Professor Anna Fribel and Lena Nassib on Milky Way stellar kinematics and chemistry. Thinking a lot about how the Milky Way formed. Yeah, so I'm what am I good at answering? I don't know, but I'll try my best to answer as much of questions as I could.
Great, thanks. Michelle?
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle. I'm a second year in atomic physics, and I'm very happy to answer questions specific to that field, and also questions about taking gap years gap years, and also questions about the written materials for the application.
Great. So you all keep moving around. Deepti?
Hi, everyone. My name is Deepti. I'm a second year graduate student here in the biophysics division. I'm happy to answer questions about anything. I spent 2 years between undergrad and starting here, so can answer questions about gap years. Also, I'm an NSF fellow if people have questions about fellowships. Yeah, but generally happy to answer anything.
Great. And then, see, am I missing anyone? Oh, Lucas?
Yeah. Hey, I'm a first year in NUPAC, so nuclear and particle experiment. Happy to answer questions on anything. And I guess I did my undergrad at a fairly small liberal arts school with no reputation.
All right. Great. So thank you all to the panelists for joining. So how we're going to be doing this, I'm going to read the question, raise your hand if it's something that you want to answer, and I'll call on people. And then we'll also be sort of trying to keep things moving along and not repeat questions that we may have addressed in the first half. Yeah, and then I think you can all see my screen. So we'll go ahead and get started. I think this is an important one. Is it true that you are admitted under specific advisors and cannot, or it is difficult to switch later? Does anyone want to chime in on this? Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, so I would start with saying I'd like to separate those two parts of the question, very much so. So the first part, are you admitted under specific advisors? May be true or may not be true, but the important part maybe once you apply is that and get in is that you can, I think it's very normal for people here to switch or to switch after their first year or to do rotations. So maybe because what I'm trying to say is the first part, not super important, because the second part is not true. It is not difficult to switch later.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit in the first hour about how you sort of are admitted, assuming funding from some source, but you can definitely switch. And then Sydney, add.
Yeah, I would like to add two things. First of all, your advisor, you don't select your advisor until the end of your first year, or at least we don't ask you who you are planning to have as your, we would call it a research supervisor until the end of your first year. But you are admitted into an area that has had to vouch for having long-term funding for you. And so there may be some work that you as a new student may need to do to go looking for funding in the new area you're planning to move into. And in some cases that can be seamless and simple. Certainly if you have, for instance, NSF funding or something else, it may make it a little easier for you. And in other areas, it could be difficult. We have something called a transitional TA. So we have a teaching assistantship specifically available for people if they're making a switch from one funding and they're looking for a different funding in another area for one term. But it does put a certain amount of responsibility on the student to just make sure there's funding in the new area. It almost always works out, but it can be stressful for students. And I just want to be transparent about that. And Michelle is 100% correct. We have a handful of students who successfully do this every year.
Yeah. I do just want to highlight that a transitional funding TA, I think the physics department was sort of ahead of the curve doing this. I think it's now MIT wide that any program at MIT, but yeah, so if you decide to switch professors, you are guaranteed a semester of TA funding in order to be able to find your new professor. Yeah, real quick, Hao Chen.
Yeah, I just want to mention, at least in my year, not everybody is admitted under specific advisors when they are admitted. Right? I remember, at least in my year, some people are offered departmental fellowships. So they are the students who like express interest in multiple possible advisors. So it's like we had until the end of the year to officially decide which advisor we want to work with. And there's another group of students who expressed like strong preference for a particular advisor in the application, and the advisor does think it's a good match. So for those students, they are admitted under particular RH already. So for them, they have a specific advisor assigned when they're admitted, and usually in general, they stay with the advisor. And while for others, we had until the end of the year to find advisor in our division and to settle with a particular advisor. So is that still the case, Cindy?
The only part of that I'll slightly amend is that for people who are admitted with research assistantships, the expectation is that they will do the work that supervisor needs them to do for the first year. Now, they, in some cases, may also look around for another supervisor or even another area. We've absolutely had people do that. So the obligation isn't something that's a long-term obligation, but that supervisor is sort of relying on them to be able to do the work that they've basically accepted. And some of the offers are pretty, broad, and some are more specific. So just be aware of what you're accepting. We certainly don't want people to be unhappy in the area that they're working in. That doesn't work for anybody at all. But do be aware of the offer that you're accepting if you receive an offer.
Great. All right. So the next question is, do we need to have straight A's all university years? What if we have average grades in one year, but better grades the following year? I would be willing to bet that most, there's not many people who come out of undergrad with 4.0s and are admitted. Like, people get B's and A- and whatever. Does anyone have anything in particular? We touched on GPA versus other parts of the application in the first hour, but if anyone has anything specific that they want to add about grades, feel free. Sure, Daniel.
Yeah, I guess upward trajectory is viewed upon more favorably than downward trajectory. Yeah, so especially if like many people start college like not fully knowing what they want to do, or maybe like there's some difficult transition period. But if you did better with your like upper level physics courses, then of course they'll be considered in your favor.
Yeah, and then do you guys even look at what their grades and their like literature course was or whatever? Like, does that factor in much?
It factors in, but not much. Yeah.
Cool. Sydney?
Oh, I just want to note that Lucas had his hand up. Lucas, did you?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, grades probably aren't the make or break thing. You're being admitted to a PhD program, so your main goal is to do research. So if you have really bad grades, maybe mention that. But otherwise, I think your research is probably more important than whether you got a B- in a class once.
So the only thing I'm going to add is a process thing about the application, and that is that there is a very annoying, very arduous, time-consuming portion of the application called the subjects taken list. Which I think all the students here will probably groan about. It's actually important because it's the opportunity for an applicant to really emphasize the physics, math, and other classes they feel were most directly relevant, and to sort of highlight those. And those are definitely the class subjects that I think our readers most closely look at. If you feel that you struggled in a particular part of that class, or there was one particular year that was difficult or whatever, this is where that optional statement might be somewhere where you want to talk about it if you feel that there was something specific going on at that point. But again, as I think Kyle said, it's pretty unusual for everybody to have all A's and everything in their application.
Yeah. Do the people still have hands up? Did any of you have more you wanted to say? No. Okay. Cool. So then the next question, maybe this is, well, I guess this is slightly different from what you did, Michelle, but this is about how would the committee view a gap year? Yeah, deep D. Oh yeah, you mentioned this too.
Yeah, so I guess there's kind of two sides to this question is whether you're applying before you take on this gap year, and then also if you're applying after the gap year. So my case was I applied before I took a gap year. And I think in that case, you're still mainly evaluated on your experiences and accomplishments prior to this gap year. And so it's not that different, but I think if you are accepted and you do still have to make a case as to why you can take this gap year. In my case, I had a scholarship to go do research abroad, and this was very much an acceptable reason to actually delay coming into the program by 2 years in my case. So that's just something to be aware of. If you want to take a gap year, that should not dissuade you from applying, especially if you think you can make a strong case for why you want to take this gap year. The second half of this question is, what if you already took this gap year, and how would the committee view that? I think in many cases, especially if that gap year is doing research or having an experience that is related in some way to your reasons and motivations for pursuing a PhD, that's going to look great on an application. In fact, a lot of people specifically take gap years to gain more research experience, or maybe to try out industry and be more sure about wanting to pursue a PhD program. And I think those are great reasons to take gap years, and you should certainly highlight the experiences that you had in your personal statement, or ask for letters from people who supervise you during that gap year. So I think in either case, this is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to add that there are multiple people in my year who did gap years and then applied while they were, not in undergrad, while they were doing something else. There's someone who worked at a national lab and applied while he was there. And then there was someone who was in industry doing something with I don't know, insurance or financial something, and then applied. He decided he didn't like industry, wanted to come back. So this is definitely doable. And I will also just mention that I did not end up taking a gap year, but the department was incredibly flexible and understanding. I sort of, was I didn't know if I was going to get this fellowship yet or not. The decision hadn't been made, and the department basically said that, yeah, if you get the fellowship, then fine, you can go do it. If not, you can start in the fall. Like that, they were super flexible about that. So, yeah. Yeah, Sydney?
I actually don't think we've ever denied someone a deferred year start. But yes, you do have to make a case for it.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. What do you think were the strong?
Sorry,
Yeah.
Super important. In our case, we also will defer our funding offer to you. That's a really important point, because there are programs that will allow students to defer, but will not necessarily guarantee their funding if they come at a different year. Very important.
Yeah. So that's awesome. Not at a disadvantage at all if you do take a gap year. All right, so next question, what do you think were the strong points in your application that got accepted? And also maybe we got 40 minutes and there's a bajillion questions on here. So maybe we'll try and limit it to 1 or 2 responses per question going forward. But is there anyone who wants to chime in on this?
I can mention that I think I had multiple research experiences in undergrad. It's not just something I did for 1 semester and dropped, but something like projects that have building up throughout my entire undergrad career, and pointed very clearly that I have an interest in cosmology. And I also did some research before I applied to see what professors do here. And especially I found Professor Kiyoshi Masui does 21 centimeter things. So I mentioned the application and put effort in learning what exactly he does. So I think I showed, basically I showed that I had the skills already developed in undergrad to do research, and I know what exactly I want to do in grad school.
Great. Okay. I think we've talked a lot, Deepti very briefly, but I think we've talked a lot about sort of what are the important things in an application. Yeah, go ahead, Deepti.
Sorry, I'll just chime in to say, even if you have experiences that don't all build up to kind of the one singular interest, I think that can also be a strong point. I had very different research experiences in undergrad, and I talked about all of them. And some of them catered to one professor's interests and others catered to a different professor's interests. So I think as a whole, it seemed like there were multiple faculty here that I would be a good fit for. And I think that could have helped as well.
Great. Right, next question is fairly specific, but it seems like a lot of people want it answered. So, what are the opportunities available in gravitational wave astrophysics and multi-messenger astronomy at MIT? Someone in astro wanna say something about this?
Yeah, I can comment on this. Even though I don't work with, gravitational waves, but, MIT has LIGO, and there are so many people working on gravitational wave astrophysics. There are certainly plenty of opportunities here. And in terms of multi-messenger astronomy, I don't work specifically with this, but I go to colloquium often, like LIGO ones and the ones at astrophysics. This is definitely one of the hot topics that brought up a lot in colloquium and in just students' discussions. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I'll also take this a second to remind everyone, we've been doing the Slido, but if you have questions, or especially if you want to look through, there's 100 questions on there. So go through and see if there's any that, down towards the bottom that you would like to get answered and upvote those. That is, again, how we're deciding which questions we're going to answer. So make sure you're doing that. Cool. What is the chance of admitting more than one student from the same institution?
Well, I can make a quick comment, right? In my year, I graduated from USC, and astrophysics division admitted another student from USC, and we both came. So that does happen, right? I would just say it's possible. It happened to me.
Yeah. Shall we?
Yeah, I guess same comments happened to me, although it was a student to like a different division, but I think it's probably not like yeah.
Michelle?
I think a helpful reframing of this is cohorts are admitted based on the personnel needs of divisions. So for example, the AMO division will look at how many people are graduating this year, how many spots or how many people do we need working in our labs. And that is the primary driver for who gets admitted. So this is not necessarily a metric I think the committee super considers in their process.
Yeah. Great. Are there word limit or page limits for the statement of purpose? This is definitely information that all of these sorts of technical questions that you can find on the department website. Let's see. Sydney, do you know the answer to this off the top of your head?
It is defined very much on the website, but I'd recommend about 2 pages. I think the longer the statement, the less people are going to be able to read the whole thing. So just be aware of that. Sadly, we have many applications. Be kind to our readers.
Yeah, as Daniel mentioned earlier, each application is read for about 10 minutes in total. So just keep that in mind. All right. How important is the personal statement? We've talked about the personal statement a little, so I'll just sort of reiterate what we've said, that it is optional, and it is where sort of other unusual factors you can talk about that stuff. It is definitely optional. I didn't submit one. I imagine a lot of people on this call didn't. But yeah, anyone want to chime in on this? Just that. Okay, then yeah, it's definitely a case-by-case thing. So let's go ahead and move on. Is there an interview process for all students? So this, I guess I will say at the outset, I think this is division specific. And it's entirely up to the divisions. Let's see. No, I did not have an interview here. I think it's more common in Astro, but it's a division specific thing. Yeah, Xiaowei, if you had an interview, you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely I think Astro usually has interview, and it's really just well, I'm just gonna say what I experienced. It's very short, 15-20 minutes, a short video call, and it's not really at least from my personal feeling, you'll be asked about things that you mentioned in your statement of purpose, like your research you've done, like what you're interested in doing, but I feel like it's more about just getting to know you a little bit more as a person. So, like usually when we get to a point where we want to interview you, I think like your paper, like everything on paper is like tell us like you're great, and it's more of just the professors on the admission committee. They want to know, they want just like actually get to talk to you. So yeah, there's usually like an interview process for like Astro at least.
Yeah, Lucas?
Yeah, same thing for NUPACs. NUPACs has interviews too, and it's a lot more of just get to know the person. They're not trying to ask you gotcha questions or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think I will also add that sometimes I think if like it's sort of very on the fence for like English language tests and stuff like that, sometimes the interviews can be used for that, just to sort of answer questions about your English speaking abilities. But yeah, great. Okay, next score. Does jury score matter to get admissions in PhD? Sydney?
I was actually going to also answer the other question. We do not interview we cannot interview every single applicant. That was written in a way that implied, do all applicants get an interview? And obviously that's not true. The GRE score is optional this year, and we truly mean that it is optional. There will be some applicants who feel that it provides an important metric in their application that would otherwise not be there. And I'll give a specific example. People who are switching areas from some other discipline to physics now may feel that a physics subject GRE score is an important added document for their record. And that's certainly their right to include that.
Yeah, great. I don't think none of us applied when the GRE was optional, so I don't know how much personal experience we will have, but that is the goal. It is truly optional. Yeah, Lucas?
Yeah, the GRE was optional for me, and I didn't submit one.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay, for the mentorship program, will mentors feel comfortable reading personal statements and providing feedback? I would just take this opportunity to shout out again that the mentorship program applications will be open soon, later today. If you feel like there's stuff that was not addressed by the webinar and the FAQ and the department website and things like that. And I can speak to this as a member of PhysGAAP. So the goal of the mentorship program is not for the mentors to be like sort of copy editing your application. Most mentors will feel comfortable sort of talking, certainly in like general big picture, like what sorts of things do you want to talk about in your application, bouncing around ideas, things like that. And in many cases, they may spend some time looking at your application and providing feedback, but we actually specifically ask mentors to not spend too much time doing that, because yeah, that's not really the goal for them to be looking at punctuation and whatever. So yeah, if anyone else was a mentor last year, I don't know exactly who was. Yeah, Daniel.
I think the guideline was like 10 hours total, including prep time. So use that time wisely.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. All right, next question is, what does a day-to-day look like for you? So maybe let's get one like first or second year who's taking classes, and then one more one grad student who's no longer in classes. So if you're, well, I guess, yeah, Deepti?
Yeah, so I'm a second year now. I think day to day, especially first year, is a lot of, I'll spend some fraction of the day like in my office doing research, maybe talking to lab mates about research projects, and then a good other fraction of the day working on problem sets, especially with other people. We'd often meet in the afternoons or the evenings to work on problem sets for classes. And then, also involved in kind of other activities on campus, such as PhysGAAP, or in my case, the grad student union, so would spend some fraction of my time on stuff like that as well. Yeah, and I do computational research, so at least in my case, the day-to-day is really like kind of sitting in my office in front of a computer, kind of working on things and talking to lab mates.
Great. And then, yeah, Hao-Chen.
Yeah, so I'm not taking classes. Fourth year, I passed my qualified exams already. So my day-to-day is most like divided between research and TA work and other activities. So most of the time is split between TA and research. Like I just host an office hour for undergrads and prepare like the solutions to undergrads homework. And for research, spend some time working by myself, but also some other time meeting with my collaborators, my advisors, and other people in our research collaboration. And outside of those, I spend time like organizing events for physics students. And I also participate in music program here. So I practice piano and I practice, singing. So yeah, it's quite a lot of different things that I do from day to day. And also talking to people in my office and just socially hanging out with people is also a big part of my day-to-day life.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just chime in with a slightly different, not certainly the norm, but another option of what you can do is I do my research, as I mentioned at the very beginning, out at Lincoln Laboratory in Lexington. So my day-to-day is actually I get on a shuttle out to Lexington and do research there because we have a close collaboration there, and then come back and go to band rehearsal or whatever else I'm doing in the evenings. But it depends on the professor, certainly. And so this is maybe something you would want to ask them before deciding to come here. But many professors are open to doing things like internships. We have another student who's in Japan right now doing an internship there, and things like that. So cool. Next question is, if you are interested in a specific field in theory that you have limited experience in, but have experience in other theory work, is that a big disadvantage? Any theorists want to chime in? Yeah, Daniel?
Some fields can be pretty competitive. So, the division can only offer so many offers. Yeah. But having said that, I actually am working in a field that's different, in the theory field that's different from what I have experience in. So it's also possible.
Yeah, there was someone, was it Recab who like switched into like CTP from something else?
He applied as a like nuclear and particle experimentalist, and then is a theorist now. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, it sounds like he had to do a lot to make that happen, though. So not easy. Okay. When writing the statement, Deepti?
Yeah, just a different perspective. I mean, I do biophysics theory, and that field in and of itself is very broad. And so the kind of projects I did in my undergrad and master's were wildly different from what I'm working on now. And I guess there's just still value in collecting a variety of different types of mathematical and computational skills. And so I think at least in the context of biophysics, it's very transferable across different types of projects. But that might not be true in other areas of theoretical physics.
Great. All right, when writing the statement of research, can we also mention research scientists we would like to work with, or should we restrict ourselves to faculty? So I can talk a little bit about this because I do work primarily with someone who's not faculty. You do need a faculty advisor. You have to have someone on the faculty as your primary advisor, and then you can be sort of, co-advised or maybe informally co-advised by someone who's not on the faculty. But I will say from talking to my non-faculty sort of co-advisor, if you put their name down on your statements, they are extremely unlikely to actually read it and have sort of no sway over the admissions process. And so, as we mentioned, the division has to have funding for you. And so if I had put that person's name down, but not the person who's my primary advisor, I think it would have been, and only done that, right? Rather than putting both of them, that could have been an issue. Sydney?
I just want to also add that if you mention anyone's name, explain why you're interested in their research area. That may be extremely helpful as well. In all cases, so just to follow up with what Kyle was just saying, you can certainly work with people who are research scientists when you get here, or even faculty in other departments. That hasn't come up yet, but it will for somebody. And we just have a structure for that you would need to have an MIT physics faculty member who's your co-supervisor. So we have a structure in place for that. But, explain why you're interested in the research areas. I think that's actually incredibly helpful for people reading the application.
Yeah. Great. Is the diversity statement guaranteed to be read if submitted? Some information doesn't fit in the statement of purpose, but I think it's still important. See, Sydney's no. Okay. Yeah. You were muted.
We don't really formally have, I don't think, a diversity statement that would, I think, come under the optional personal statement, but maybe I'm misunderstanding the question.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's what they were saying. If Daniel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that like all of the components that are submitted get read at least once, right? Like
Yeah, I mean, the student committee, we will read a personal statement if there is one. I don't know if it's enforced for the division readers, but I think most readers will try to read whatever is available.
Sure, great. Let's see, how advantageous to admission would it be to have an external fellowship funding you? So I guess one thing that I'll point out is a lot of times you don't know if you've gotten the fellowship until well after the applications and like decisions have been made. Like the NSF doesn't, like you don't get those decisions until April sometime. So I think it's relatively uncommon for people to come in to apply and say that they already have this fellowship funding. But it can be useful for some things once you get here, make it easier if you want to switch advisors or things like that. Anyone else want to chime in? All right, I guess I'll say like if you have it, included in your application, then I'm sure that's a positive thing, just like any other sort of award or whatever. Yeah. Okay. How important are undergraduate? Oh, things are moving around. All right. Is there a separate application for theoretical versus applied physics? I think the answer is no. There's just the physics department here. Some schools do have like physics and applied physics and whatever, but we just have physics, and so I don't think the rest of this question. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
I will point out we have a lot of like physics adjacent, or like what I would consider like actual physics groups in like EECS, like people doing superconducting qubits, or even like the nuclear science and engineering departments. So I'd recommend checking those out if you're interested.
Yeah. And I think yeah, go ahead, Sydney.
Oh, just super importantly, just to jump onto that. That will be absolutely, we have interdisciplinary research all over the Institute, but you would be applying to the physics department. And it's, you can't switch from department to department at the graduate level. We don't have a mechanism for that. You would be either accepted or not accepted to the physics department. Now you can apply to more than one department, and that's another route to doing that. And we did talk earlier about the difference between switching areas and being able to make sure you have funding when you switch the area. I just want to highlight that.
Yeah, and then one thing that I want to highlight, I guess, for US students in particular, if you're also applying or have submitted, I think they've been due, the NSF application, make sure you apply to the same department as you specified in the NSF application, because the NSF will not fund you if you applied in electrical engineering, but like join the physics department. So just like make sure that that's the case. Deepti?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this is like a similar question for me as I applied to physics programs as well as biophysics or computational biology programs. And I think for me personally, in making that decision at each institution, a lot of the considerations are sort of what is the program like? What kinds of classes are you required to take? What is their qualifying exam process? And, you know, in a lot of institutions, you can apply for both programs at the same university. But these are just some things to keep in mind. Also, you know, does it mean something to you to have an actual physics degree versus some other department's degree, even if you're going to do very physics-y or physics adjacent research? So these are all very personal questions that are worth kind of looking into at each school, because it did influence my decision. I applied to different programs at each institution depending on these considerations. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, cool. Couple of GPA questions. Let's try and get through these quickly. So how important are undergraduate class rankings? I don't know if we ask for that specifically. Yeah, we just asked for GPA. So we've talked already about how GPA, you know, it's important because what they're trying to determine is will you succeed? And part of that is classes here. But it's not like the most important thing necessarily. And then let's go ahead and get the other GPA question out of the way. Some universities give a GPA out of 10. I believe there are very specific instructions for how to handle this on the application and on the physics department website. So take a look at those and follow those carefully. And if you have more questions, I think you can email the physicsgrad@mit.edu is the appropriate place for that. So great, let's keep going. Can you guys post a link to examples of statement of purpose? I think there may be something like this on the physics application website, but there are lots of places where you can find these sorts of things online. We're not going to post a link here. I think the MIT, like the writing department or maybe it's some bio department at MIT that has a very helpful like annotated example that I know I've seen frequently when searching for these things. Yeah, I will say there are places where you can find examples. If you are like, if you don't really know or have access to resources or people who know what these things look like, then maybe the PhysGAAP mentorship program is something to consider. And then you could talk a little bit more through what a statement of purpose should look like with someone in the department. Michelle?
Yeah, I remember when I was applying for the NSF fellowship, there's a guy called Alex Lang, L-A-N-G, who has a blog. And on it, he has a bunch of personal statements that people wrote for the NSF. And those are very similar in requirements to this. So if you go into his website and look at a spreadsheet, he has people who have agreed to put their statements up on the internet for people to read. And that's helpful.
Great. And actually, I think, yeah, Mason, if you could post that in the Zoom chat, maybe you sent me a link on Slack, but I don't have the ability to transfer that over myself, but I think that is what I was referring to. So, okay. Great. Okay. Who actually decides who's offered a place? Oh, we talked about this, but I guess to be very transparent about exactly technically how it happens, there's this so it goes to the grad admissions, the admissions committee. All applications are read once and there's some filtering that happens there. It goes then to divisions. That's primarily, I think, where the decisions are made. Each division will decide who they want to accept. And at the end of the day, there's this, I think there's a day-long meeting. They go through every applicant that the divisions want to admit. And it is, I believe, a unanimous decision of the faculty to admit someone. But it's basically decided by the divisions. Is there anything else that is missing from that? Yeah, Sydney?
Just to add that I would say each division can nominate the applicants they would like to be discussed by the full committee, and the decision is made by the full committee on behalf of the department. The offer is made by the department. And funding is discussed at that time also.
Yeah, sorry, that the offers made by the department. I think a lot of the decision making happens in the division, at the division level. Yeah, cool. All right, have you emailed the professors who you want to work with before submitting your application? How helpful do you think this is? I want to reiterate that this is not required again. And then if anyone has other thoughts on this, personally, I did not, but other people feel free to chime in. Yeah, Sydney?
There really isn't a mechanism for them to give that feedback. It's more that the applicant may be interested in learning more about what research is being done in the lab. And a lot of that information is available on the website, and may not only be from the professors, but may also be available from grad students and others. There's no way to get a sponsor who is going to sponsor the application. We don't do that here. I know it's done elsewhere.
Yeah, Deepti.
Yeah, I was going to say this really varies from professor to professor. My undergraduate advisor advised against this because he personally, if he gets those emails, he completely ignores them because he has no idea if they're actually going to come. So it's sort of a waste of his time, so to speak, to entertain this possibility. Other professors are open to responding to such inquiries. My advice is, if you choose to do this, have a very specific question in mind and keep the email short, because if a professor is quickly scanning it and doesn't see sort of why you're emailing them or how they can help you, then it's likely just going to be ignored. So maybe ask a very specific question about their research that can be quickly answered, or if you could try to ask to talk to them, but again, just keep in mind, professors are very busy. So if they ignore your email or they say they can't talk to you, don't be discouraged by that. So yeah, I think given all those considerations, it's probably not a very important thing to do, but if you feel like you want to, there's also probably no harm. At the very least, it gives you some name recognition because they remember that they may remember that this person emailed me, but yeah.
Yeah, Lucas, real quick.
Yeah, just kind of going on that. If I don't know, I think there are like 1,800 people that apply every year. So if every one of them sends a professor an email plus to everything else they have. So again, it doesn't hurt, but your first step should be to read a couple of their papers and watch a couple of their lectures. And then once you have an idea of their research, reach out to them about a specific question, or even reach out to a graduate student because you're more likely to get a response from them.
Great. Okay, next question is, what is the percentage of international grad students in the physics department? I have no idea what that number is. Yeah, Sydney?
It generally hovers around 50-50, but we don't have target numbers that we're going for.
Yeah.
And again, remember, we're making offers to a certain number of applicants, approximately half of whom will accept the offer. So we don't control that either.
Yeah. Okay, do referees need to be professors? Is it okay to have a PhD student postdoc as a referee if they were your research internship mentor? So I think this is maybe an important sort of American versus other like European. I think this can be different. I guess I will say, like, it's generally expected that your referees are either professors or like a research scientist or a, someone in industry, potentially some sort of supervisor of a research project you're working on, something like that. I think you generally want to avoid PhD students as referees. Yeah, Deepti?
Just to say, don't be concerned if you feel like most of your interactions are with a postdoc or grad student, because most professors will consult the person who's directly advising you on a day-to-day basis when they write their letter. But the letter just means a lot more coming from the professor because they're an important person in their field. People in the department are probably might be aware of them. And so you don't want to hurt your application by asking someone who's less well known and doesn't have as much recognition. So, and if you're concerned about this, you can even talk to this mentor of yours, research scientist, PhD student, and ask them, would you be able to have a conversation with the advisor about my work and my standing, and have that be part of the letter. But I imagine that the professor will do that themselves without you asking for that.
Great. How does the interviewers get decided? Is it more likely to be interviewed by faculty? You mentioned the statement of purpose. Again, this varies by division, and not all divisions have interviews, and not everyone who applies gets an interview. I don't know if we really have. Yeah, Lucas.
For new packs, I know there was some correlation between who you mentioned in your statement of purpose and who interviewed you, but it was only a correlation. It wasn't, you're not guaranteed if you had an interview to have the people you mentioned in your statement of purpose because they have busy schedules and all that too.
Cool. And real quick, Houchin.
In Astro, the interviews are generally done by faculties on the admission committee. So they are not the faculty you necessarily mentioned in your statement of purpose, but they are certainly aware that you mentioned somebody and might have consulted with them.
Great. Okay, how much does each faculty have a say in the admission decisions? So I think, again, there's some difference between divisions here. But I think it can often be that an individual faculty will have a big say, especially if they, come out and say, hey, I have RA funding for this applicant. I think that is very likely to get someone admitted. Does anyone else have anything to say? Okay, a more fun question. What is your favorite and least favorite thing about the MIT Physics PhD program? Open to anyone. Yeah, Houchin.
Yeah, I can go first. My favorite thing about the program for me is, of course, the people. I really like people in my cohort, in the department overall, have many friends. They really keep me, mentally and emotionally healthy, like throughout the program overall. And the least favorite thing, I guess, and many people have the same issue, is that some classes, it depends on, what class, some classes, sometimes homework can be a little tough, with exam, the stress can be a real thing. But again, that comes from, it can be alleviated by my favorite thing, which is people. You work with people in a large group, you make friends, you struggle together. So yeah, it's still manageable for me.
Great. And Deepti?
Yeah, I think my favorite thing is the really vibrant and collaborative research community that we have here at MIT. I think Sydney mentioned I do somewhat interdisciplinary research, and that community is really strong. There are journal clubs that I'm a part of that go across departments. There's the Center for Physics of Living Systems, which has weekly seminars. My research group itself is very diverse, and I think it's just really exciting to be able to interface with so many different research groups in all of these different ways, and have like really cool conversations about science with really awesome people. I think least favorite thing is probably just the quals process in all the classes. I mean, I think most PhD students will say this is their least favorite thing, of having to kind of just jump through the hoops and do the things you need to do to get your degree. Yeah, but like everyone gets through it. Every single person passes quals eventually. So as miserable as it might seem at times, it will be over, and we will finish it eventually. I'm not there yet, but hopefully soon.
Yeah, maybe just something to add about the quals. We haven't gotten many questions about that, which is fair. I think you're all, worried about the this hurdle rather than the next couple of hurdles, but something to keep in mind once you've been admitted to schools is to keep that in mind. I think, MIT has maybe slightly more intense like classes and qual requirements than some other schools, but less intense than others. So it's just, something to ask about as you're doing open houses and things like that. Okay. What extra skills? Maybe I can answer this real quick, which is that like, if you have skills applicable to what you're trying to say in your application, you should include those, but there's not like a specific list of skills that are required for everyone. I don't know. I think that mostly answers that. Yeah, Deepti.
I was going to say, also highlighting soft skills, like if you've had experience participating in collaborations or working in a team, I think it is valuable to mention that in your statement of purpose, just because that is a big part of research. So it's not just limited to technical skills.
Yeah. Okay, will extracurriculars outside of physics, like music or language, count against an applicant? So I guess I can say that like I did, other things in undergrad. I played in bands and things like that. But there's not really, maybe there's a little place on the application to mention sort of extracurriculars, but it's not a big part of your application. I didn't write about it in my like statement of purpose or anything like that. But I don't think they count against you. Yeah, Hao Chen?
Yeah, I do a lot of things outside of research, both in undergrad and now. And as long as, it does not prevent you from performing well in class, it does not prevent you from doing research, it certainly will not be a disadvantage. Some people even value that to some degree. So that's my take on this.
Yeah, Daniel?
Right. Yeah. Like they said, as long as it doesn't, get in the way of your academics. One thing we were explicitly looking out for last year was like time management skills and being able to like have a life outside of your academics demonstrates the ability to manage your time well.
Cool. Let's see. We've talked a lot about the statement of purpose already. Anyone have anything they want to add about this question? The wording's a little interesting. I don't think the physics department is looking for a specific worldview. I think they want to see who's going to be successful. Daniel, is your hand still up to answer this? Oh, okay, all good. If there's, yeah. I guess I'll say again, if you don't think that we have sufficiently answered questions about statement of purpose, like the statement of purpose questions are gonna be a lot more personal. If you don't think they've been sufficiently answered by this webinar, feel free to apply for the PhysGAAP mentorship program. All right, we're sure, Deepti.
Yeah, I assume this was already answered before, but since I also joined in the second half, or in case other students have also joined in the second half, I guess really quick, you want to really highlight the various research experiences that you've had, kind of talk through sort of the motivation, your specific individual contributions to projects that you've worked on and how it's affected your motivation to go into graduate school. And so usually each of those experiences gets a paragraph or more, depending on if you had one long experience or many small experiences. And then, yeah, usually at the end, you have a short paragraph talking about sort of why you want to attend MIT specifically and what faculty you might want to work with and why. And I also usually included a paragraph about my interest in diversity and inclusion and teaching, although that's probably optional. So yeah, just a quick summary for anyone who missed it earlier.
Yeah, okay. What does MIT ask recommenders to rank students? So I think this is an easy question to answer because when you are working on your application, the way MIT does it, like you have to manually send the email to your recommenders. And so you can see exactly what MIT asks them for as you like send them that email asking them for their letters. So, but I think the answer is no. Okay. Let's see. Question about GRE score reports. I think, again, this is on the department website and the application. It answers all of these things. So let's see.
Scores should be self-reported. We don't need your actual official score sheet.
Great. For interrelated physics departments, we've mostly answered this. I will say that MIT doesn't have an astro department. It's a division within physics. So that doesn't apply to this specific case. We've already talked about how to work with people, that you can work with people from other departments. It just requires a sponsor or a faculty in physics. All right. Cool. Well, we're at noon now, so I think this concludes the webinar. Again, I will say if you have questions that were not answered during the webinar, to check out the PhysGAAP mentorship program or physics-grad@mit.edu email address and look through again the physics department grad applications website. There's a lot of great information there. I'd like to thank all of the panelists and Sydney especially for being here to answer all these questions. This webinar has been recorded, and so in some amount of time, it will be uploaded to the website with transcript and all of that, and you will receive an email when that happens. Yeah, so thank you all so much for coming. Wish you the best of luck on your applications this cycle. Hopefully this webinar has been helpful. All right. Thanks, everyone.